Hello everyone, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Compression Thinking series. My name is Ethan Berry and I'm joined by Robert Doc Hall, co-founder of the Compression Institute and professor emeritus at the Indiana University Kelley School of Business. Doc's career started in engineering and manufacturing. His experience in these fields is what paved the way for his realization that current business models are contributing to the destruction of our planet. How do we get along without leaving too much of a mess? How do we adapt to a changing environment? Well, these are some of the questions Doc has been asking his entire career. This series is about how you can help to make a difference by making nature a stakeholder in your business or community. To do this, we need to change our values. But before we can do that, we need to change the way we think. If you enjoy this series, please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Doing so helps us spread this program to more people and more communities who may benefit from the message. Now, you may be wondering what we mean when we use the word compression. Well, in the context of this podcast, compression is a reference to the squeeze we are putting on nature. To ease the compression of nature, we need to compress the way we live. Compression thinking is a guide to help us do just this, hopefully before it's too late. So how do you become a compression thinker? Well, you'll just have to keep listening to find out. So today we are going to be talking about the first principle in Doc's Guide to Compression Thinking, the Earth is finite. What does that mean? Well, it just means that everything in the Earth is limited and the space of the Earth is limited too. You know, if you're an astronaut looking down from a space station at the planet, it's painfully obvious. But for us, you know, living here down on the Earth, for some of it's not so obvious. Doc, why do you think this is?
Oh, it's our history with this. Within my memory, we had one or two spectacular firsts, like the climbing of Mount Everest. And so way up into the 20th century, there were parts of the Earth that were still unexplored. Most of that's over now. And we've been just about anywhere and everywhere. Now we're thinking about space. So we've always wanted to kind of keep expanding, and that may have begun earlier, but it really took on a big scope with European colonization beginning 500 or more years ago. And so that's the mentality. We still have it.
Yeah, that manifest destiny.
Yeah, that was it in the United States, that it's all unlimited. It's all there for the taking. All you got to do is go get it.
We tend to think of it in terms of what we're taking from the environment, our resources, but it's also what we're putting back into it. Our relationship with the nature in these two areas has created a lot of existential threats. I know you've prepared a list of some of those, Doc.
Yeah, there are about 20. Let's not go through all of them, but war is right at the top of the list, and in these podcasts we won't say much about it, but obviously if people are into a hot war or even into terrorism, protecting the environment is not a very high priority on their list. And then you got nuclear war and nuclear radiation and trying to dispose of radioactive substances, so that's an ongoing issue, and there's a bunch more, yeah. People do live there. It's still maybe a little radioactive. I don't really know. I haven't kept up. But no, it would never again be what it was for sure. But you can dig into the details of any one of these. There's the problem of biodiversity. That's much bigger than people think because all biodiversity is actually local. It's not some far-off problem. The one that most people in business can relate to the quickest is depletion of resources. That our mineral resources and even our sources of, say, fossil fuels do not return as much as they used to for the effort it takes to get something. Because you keep trying to work sources that are more distributed, more depleted. And so the more your energy is spread, the more energy it takes to get together. There's ocean acidification, and I just saw where somebody was trying to relate ocean acidification to triggering what's called thermohaline extinction.
What is that?
That's if the ocean currents shift, you really do shift a lot of climate in a hurry. Because what would happen if the Gulf Stream suddenly changed? It wasn't there, it went somewhere else. And so you can go on. The ozone hole isn't really gone. It's still there. We've gotten rid of a lot of the CFC-12, the Freon that was the main culprit 30 years ago. But there are more. They're still there.
One of them that you had on your list that startled me, I wasn't too aware of it beforehand, was the endocrine disruptors.
Endocrine disruptors interfere with the hormone function and signaling in glandular systems, and we have, a half dozen or more major ones. Hypothalamus, adrenal gland, pancreas, thyroid. Pituitary is sort of a little dinky, kind of a master controller gland at the base of the brain. The ones that get attention are ovaries and testes, the sexual systems of males and females, not only of humans, but animals. But anyway, what does one of these things do? Well, a very small amount can mess up the signaling of these glandular systems. And what do endocrinologists, MDs, do mostly? I'd say up to half of everything they treat now is obesity. The idea being that upsetting the hormonal system has upset your control of your appetite. There are other factors like the management of the microbiomes and so on, but that's a pretty good one.
How widespread is that? How many people are affected by this?
Oh, almost every person in any advanced economy, including the United States, has at least one known endocrine disruptor in their blood. And so this is affecting us. And these things can accumulate. One of them is dioxin, which is known to accumulate. And dioxin is associated with reduced sperm counts in males. Mm-hmm. And so your body doesn't get rid of it. If you're exposed to it, you keep accumulating it. And, the more of it you have, well, I guess the worse it is, even though a very small amount has its effect. Another one that's pretty widespread is the bisphenols, A, S, F. The one that got attention is bisphenol A, but the other varieties of it don't seem to be much better. And they're in all kinds of plastics or plasticizer. They're associated with cancer, and they're certainly associated with obesity, especially in children. Another sneaky one is atrazine, and that one is pretty well now known as an endocrine disruptor in frogs. In effect, it effeminizes a male frog so it can't reproduce, and frogs disappear. Nobody knows what it does for humans, but it's probably not good.
How is this stuff getting spread, Doc? How are we all coming into contact with this?
They're part of the huge number of chemicals that keep being made in larger numbers and dispersed in a lot of places. Atrazine is widely used in the Corn Belt, for instance. So, like in Iowa, well, there's atrazine in almost every source of drinking water. Perchlorates, fire retardants, some of those chemicals are endocrine disruptors, and fire retardants may be in your clothing. They may be in the materials that are used for your furniture, for the couch you're sitting on. And so they're all around.
As a group, humanity, we don't think too hard about what we do with products we consume or the materials we consume, however you want to phrase that, after we're done with them, right? Just we kind of, you put the garbage bag in the trash can and it's kind of out of sight, out of mind.
True. This for all of us. It went someplace, I don't know where, but it's gone. And there really is no away on Earth. It's there. Could it leach out sometime? Sure, sometimes does. Thinking about this, you get into compression thinking. What are you going to do about it? Well, there are a lot of specifics we could do. Nearly all of them relate to simply reducing our consumption of this stuff. If we weren't consuming it and wanting to use all this for our convenience, we think, well, manufacturers wouldn't be making it. We wouldn't be pitching it.
Yeah, and we need to, stop and consider the cost of all this convenience, right?
Fragility of a modern economic system to disruption. The one we think of now is cybersecurity. Could somebody crack into the systems that control the electrical grid and take a chunk of it down? Sure. They've cracked into automobiles. Could they crack into the entire system of a company that has a storehouse of the software that's fed into these things? Well, I have no idea. Don't know whether anybody even tried. But could that happen? Well, if it's possible, it could happen.
Yeah, and if we went around polling people to the whole reason we're doing this podcast is to spread awareness on these issues. And I bet if we went out and started polling people right now, many people wouldn't even, understand what we're talking about, right? They don't see this. We're not really focused on the product, right? The energy, gasoline, I leave my lights on all the time. I shouldn't, but I do. We think of it in terms of, us, right? The money aspect of it. How much does it cost? And it's dirt cheap, right? So we don't see any problem to worry.
Sure, we were, just before we got on this, we were talking about air conditioning. What would you do without air conditioning? Well, you'd figure out something else to do. That's what you'd do. If you went back 100 years ago, there wasn't hardly any of that stuff, and so how did people get along? Well, they redesigned their houses, and they tried to live where there were trees, and they got along without it. May not have been quite as comfortable, but they got along without it.
They were adapting to the land, not trying to twist the environment or manipulate it.
Good way to put it. They were adapting to nature. They weren't trying to adapt nature to them. The return on energy of a photovoltaic cell is okay now. I keep seeing numbers of 10 to 12 to 1, which is okay. And we need to get into what that return on energy is. Some of the windmills might get that high. Of course, both of those are on again, off again kinds of sources. So now you need batteries, so you lose some of the battery, and then battery technology has to come along, and then what do you put in batteries? And could we run out of stuff to put into really high-performance batteries? And then you get into maybe rare earth shortages, and you need neodymium, and maybe some other stuff for these high-performance generators and motors. And, it's a tangled web.
Yeah, it is a tangled web, and it's difficult to make sense of, unless you really are looking at it for an extended amount of time, really trying to study it. And that's why I love this analogy I heard you use once, kind of using human metabolism, right, as an analogy for how we consume energy. Could you explain that to people? Because I think it kind of it explains this process pretty well.
Well, every living thing has a metabolism, that it's the minimal energy that it has to use to keep its bodily function going. Humans are we're mammals. So if you are not consuming enough calories to maintain your bodily function, you're going to starve to death quickly or slowly. But you need more than that, because every form of life, every humans and all animals need enough energy to fulfill their life cycle. That is, to go to maturity, to create young, to do whatever they need to do to get that next generation to adulthood. And they may use a little energy to play around in various things, but they don't use much more energy than is needed to fulfill their life cycle. Now, we have created a system for our convenience that uses enormously more energy than that. We want to be warm when it's cold, we want to be cool when it's hot, and that consumes quite a bit of energy. And then we want to go a lot of places, and then we take a vehicle to do that. And so instead of moving just ourselves, we'll move 10 to 20 times our weight in some vehicle just to move us. And then you get to the use of energy to make the stuff that we use, and pretty soon you've racked up a metabolism for a modern economy that is way beyond what's minimally necessary just for humans to stay alive.
Mm-hmm. And there's such a lack of awareness when it comes to like our consumption of energy. Um, when you were talking about, driving around in your car a second ago, it made me think of one example. When I drove here today, I wasn't thinking, how much gas am I eating up? I was thinking of how long is it going to take me, right?
Yeah, me too.
We kind of, it's kind of thinking selfishly, right? Or not really thinking about, well, it's just a lack of awareness, right?
Yeah, well, we think of the experience we have. Like you ask somebody, if you're talking about vehicles, how far is Houston? Oh, about 3 hours. How far is Dallas? Oh, about 5 hours. You don't think that it was 20 gallons of gas at 112,000 BTUs per gallon. Don't think about the energy. Trying to be aware of how much energy you use is a little difficult. If you put a high price on energy, we would instantly become a little more aware, I think. But can you become aware without a dollar sign being attached to it? And so you don't see energy, you see the results of it. You see the car move and you feel it get warmer, get cool. So you feel the results, but you don't see the energy. It's unseen. I've never seen a picture of a BTU. But being aware that this is a very high energy economy is helpful. It even takes a lot of energy for artificial intelligence, computers. It's thought by now that if you're really going to gin up computers to do a lot more, it's going to consume maybe 10% of all the generated electrical energy on Earth to run them. They are not energy free. And so how do you start thinking of it differently? Awareness of energy consumption is helpful. I know people are trying to put little electrical meters on this, that, and the other. So if you are kind of conscious of it, you see it. I drove a Prius for quite some time, and I noticed the psychological effect of just watching the display. I'd have an easy foot, and Toyota did an experiment with it, that just that system, if you had no hybrid at all, just that feedback system to the driver was worth 4% on fuel economy.
We keep talking about systemic problems, and one of the biggest problems is the scale. An argument that I keep hearing from people is that because of this, and because so many people are dependent on the way we do things, that changing it could be potentially harmful. Do you think that's true, Doc?
No, because you want to support the population at an energy level way above that which is necessary to keep the population going. It's obvious that the more people there are, the more energy it's going to take, because we're going to use some energy beyond our metabolic energy. And so, yeah, the population's a problem. It needs to level off, maybe drop back. I've even seen proposals where, do you ever think it'd be fine if we just took the human population down to about 1 billion again, with no real forethought for exactly how would you do that? James Lovelock was a guy that had that idea in a book, and he had absolutely no follow-on to it. He was just thinking, well, if the population was much lower, we'd be using less energy and stuff, and everything be okay. Compression thinking is, how can a lot of us learn to think differently and compress our own use of energy and other materials and live a pretty good life using much less. That takes you toward compression thinking. Or in this sense, can we learn to think energy cycles and life cycles, not birth, death, that's, make, use, throw away. And that's what's getting us in trouble. It's very, very high energy. If you were to localize a lot of economies and do the R's, the recycle, reuse, repurpose, and if I'd get a chance to ask somebody that's a manufacturer about this and make some product, well, what will it look like in 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years? Would it still be here? Would it still be useful? And so do you have something that is going to work on a regular replenishment cycle? I know at least one company, Sekisui Housing, that thinks of residential housing in terms of its cycles. How long will it last before it needs maybe a little bit of an upgrade? How long will it last before you need to take it apart and put up a new one? What's the life cycle of a house?
So, kind of summarizing that, instead of thinking about how much money you're making from what you're doing, you're actually thinking about what it is you're doing.
Exactly. What are we actually doing? And it's not driving for the lowest cost of doing anything by the cost models or business models we now use. And before we really get off of it, talk about depletion of fuel resources. So the original Texas oil gusher, Spindletop, it put a pipe down about 600-700 feet, and kaboom, it was under pressure, and the black stuff went everywhere. And the return on that had to be at least 100 to 1. If you remember maybe you don't, the old opening scene of the Beverly Hillbillies where he just went out with a pan and scooped it up off the ground. It doesn't get easier than that. But if you got to go down 2 miles, 3 miles in the Gulf and maybe a mile or two horizontal drilling, that's a lot of energy going in for the energy you get. Return on energy of fracking is maybe 5 to 1. And of the concentrated oil fields on Earth, the return on energy keeps dropping because they go into secondary recovery and then tertiary, and it's maybe down to 30 to 1 now. And scientists have really studied this. Calculating a return on energy is a fun thing to do, and you can never account for absolutely everything that's an input on the energy side. But nonetheless, their rough estimate is you got to maintain a return on energy of 8-10 to 1 to have anything resembling a modern economy. If it starts to drop below that, you're starting to drop back to pre-industrial levels.
That's kind of where we're heading towards today, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, you're sliding that direction, whether we realize it or not, because it's real easy to use cheap energy to get expensive energy by a financial model, and now you deceive yourself. Oh, we're getting return on our investment. How wonderful. Well, there isn't any surefire formula for this. Every place is different. The implications of this are huge. For instance, if you just stabilize the population, most of the assumptions we have for financial funds would go into a cocked hat. Even compound interest is a growth formula. If you don't have growth, what happens to that formula? We depend on those things and don't even think about it with the system we have. And so the finale of this is learn to think compression or learn compression thinking. And that's learning to think about life cycles now and way into the future, not short-term birth, death, forget it.
And that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed listening to this, please feel free to join us in our weekly teleconferences where we discuss the problems you and your community are facing while trying to think of possible solutions. The problems we're up against are way too large for any one person to tackle on their own. It takes all of us coming together. These dialogue sessions happen every Tuesday. You can participate by calling the number provided on our webpage. Times, topics, and the number to call are all found under the Compression Thinking Series tab on our website, www.compression.org. Also, please do not forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If we're going to make a dent in some of the issues we discussed today, it will take all of us coming together, and your support helps. I know it feels as if we've merely scratched the surface of this topic, so if you're interested in learning more, you can check out Doc's many papers, videos, and book reviews at the same website, www.compression.org. Thanks for listening, everyone.